Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you. And I'd like to begin by thanking Gail Binley-Taylor Sante for her very warm introduction. I'd also like to thank the organizers of this annual meeting of ACUNS, particularly Professor Patricia Goff, the Executive Director of the organization, and Professor Timothy Shaw, the Director of the Institute of International Relations here at St. Augustine. I'm particularly pleased to return to the campus since I was a student here several years ago at the Institute. I say return because I spent many, useful years here at the university, 1 year here at St. Augustine, which helped, to mold and create my abilities to undertake the work I've done over the last 30 years or so within the United Nations system. I ended up as the head of the Caribbean division at UNDP when I got much more involved in many of the development challenges of the Caribbean. So I therefore see this as a very, very good opportunity to link the work of the United Nations with the Caribbean and many of the challenges that the countries of the Caribbean experience. And this conference theme of small, middle, and emerging powers in the United Nations system, I think is really a most appropriate occasion to enable me to do this. So you will find that in my brief remarks at the outset, I would certainly be providing a Caribbean perspective on the topic. But as you heard from the chair, after we have made our presentations, we hope we will have a lively interactive session. I will seek to demonstrate that the Caribbean countries at the United Nations, through their representatives both at New York and Geneva, have played a significant role in the development of several issues at the United Nations. Indeed, Caribbean countries have been able to exact favorable support from the international community on a number of issues of priority concern to them and other like-minded countries through their methodical and effective consultations and negotiations in the UN General Assembly, the Economic and Social Council, and other UN fora like the World Trade Organization. Madam Coordinator, we live in an increasingly globalized world, and thus we find action by one country, be it in the domain of rising food or energy prices, climate change, migration, or security-related actions, are sure to have impacts of varying scales on other countries. This, I would submit, is therefore a period in history more than ever when a multilateralist approach is needed to facilitate a truly global response to these myriad and serious development and global challenges that we face today. There can be no room for division and discord in today's international response. Rather, and indeed, exclusive state sovereignty and territorial integrity can no longer be the main guiding principles. Sovereignty must be exercised responsibly, and consultation and pragmatism need to replace unilateralism. I would therefore like to suggest that the current challenges of today require a form of global governance in which large, medium, and small states all have a role to play. And I would also like to posit at the outset that Caribbean countries are well placed to play an important role in formulating some appropriate responses to many of these global challenges. In support of this thesis, let me just cite a few examples. But I would first want to take you back to when the Caribbean countries first became members of the UN, starting with Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica in 1962. These two Caribbean countries were not particularly active during the first period of the 60s and the 70s, as it was normal for the maturing process of statehood to take root. But they ventured out into, and did not venture out into major diplomatic forays. But their sporadic efforts were nevertheless helped at that time by a strong multilateral approach to international relations. In the initial post-Cold War period, the world experienced the beginnings of a redistribution of power that was taking place in the international system, including a period dominated by attempts of a unipolar world by the United States, by the USA. It was then that there were early signs of a more active set of CARICOM countries, and in some cases, they not only got involved, but led the way in the formulation of policies to address some global challenges. A case in point is the area of the environment, and the decision of the United Nations to convene the Environment Conference of 1992, in which Jamaica, I don't know how many people are aware of this, but played a key role. And in relation to that conference, we all should recall that Agenda 21, which emanated from it, provided an all-embracing framework for the United Nations work on a number of issues related to sustainable development, issues such as biodiversity, desertification, climate change, and indeed, and also the focus on the sustainable development of smaller and developing states, which was in fact led by Barbados in the early 1990s, emanating in the conference 1994 in Bridgetown. The initial post-war period was followed by one of globalization and a further increase in the redistribution of power with the newly emerging powers of India, Brazil, and South Africa. And you will find that the onset of globalization certainly created opportunities and risks for countries participating in the global economy. Indeed, under the right conditions, great benefits were derived by a number of countries from their more effective participation in global trade. However, globalization also brought with it a number of problems that few governments can stop or control on their own. In the case of the Caribbean countries, their economies have encountered serious adjustment problems because of their small size in the emerging global trading regime. An important need consequently developed for the integration of the concept of special and differential treatment in the architecture of the multilateral trading system to assist the small countries like those of the Caribbean in enhancing their competitiveness in international markets. And this is where a number of CARICOM countries at Geneva, more so than at New York, initiated and led the fight for the development and eventual acceptance of the concept of small vulnerable economies, the SVEs as we know them. Barbados was one of the three original proponents of the need for greater focus on the development challenges of small states with small and vulnerable economies, and they had two other countries join them at the outset, Mauritius and Lesotho. Later, a number of other countries from the Pacific and Central America also came on board, totaling eventually 24 in all. Although they obtained a lot of intellectual support originally from UNCTAD and the Commonwealth Secretariat, these countries represented a strong advocacy group that lobbied for the recognition of their concerns and special treatment within the WTO. And this collectively helped to increase the understanding of the concerns of the SVEs. And you may just want to know that the permanent representative of Barbados to the UN at Geneva was one of the earlier chairmen of the group, and the staff of the permanent mission of Barbados at Geneva continues to be the de facto secretariat. So you're beginning to get a taste of some of the involvement of CARICOM countries, Caribbean countries, in the work of the United Nations. There are just a few other details I would want to mention regarding this particular example, because the efforts of the group were successful in achieving and maintaining a high level of political support for their concerns. And this was evidenced by, at a number of WTO ministerial meetings, the one in Doha in 2001, when the ministers endorsed a work program on small economies. And then at the second ministerial in Hong Kong, we found that we went beyond the endorsement of the actual work program and adopted a number of specific measures that were to be taken. So you could see that the advocacy work by this group of small states in Geneva has led to an increased recognition of small economies and their particular concerns in the World Trade Organization, as well as in the wider global economy. Now, in addition to the work done at Geneva, CARICOM states have also pursued an active policy of development cooperation at the United Nations in New York. Let me just identify some of the issues, and I won't go into details except one of them. But these issues included the environment and sustainable development, climate change, financing for development, particularly the issue of financial services and the offshore banking, HIV and AIDS, the Caribbean Sea, particularly the sustainable development of it, and the United Nations system-wide coherence. The one issue on which I would like to make a few comments relates to climate change, given what I consider to be its importance for the survival of small states, particularly the island states of the Caribbean and the Pacific.